What do you do when your wife calls you overreacting, and the only thing louder than her denial is the voicemail she accidentally left behind, played on speaker at your own kitchen table, with nowhere for her lies to hide? My name is Adrian Holt, and I used to believe that if you stayed calm long enough, the truth would eventually get tired of hiding. I thought patience was a virtue, like flossing or paying taxes on time, something boring but necessary if you wanted your life to keep its shape. Then my wife looked me in the eyes, rolled them like I was an inconvenience she had already scheduled, and said I was overreacting. It was not the words that did it, not exactly, but the way she delivered them like a verdict she expected me to accept without appeal. The kitchen light was too bright for two people pretending to be honest. It was late enough that the house had settled into that quiet that feels less like peace and more like a deal you made with your own thoughts. The dishwasher was humming, our old clock was ticking, and the air smelled faintly like the lemon cleaner she liked because it made her feel productive. She stood by the counter with her arms crossed, posture perfect, expression controlled, as if I had dragged her into a meeting she didn't want to attend. I sat at the table because sitting makes you look reasonable, and I wanted to look reasonable, even if I no longer felt it. There was a kind of cold forming behind my ribs, slow and clean, like a lake freezing over without a sound. I had not planned this conversation the way she planned everything, with a script and a tone and a little invisible exit door she could slip through if the room got uncomfortable. I had simply reached the end of pretending that my own senses were unreliable. She asked what my problem was, as if the problem had a name tag and she hadn't noticed it at the door. I told her there was a voicemail on my phone, and I watched her eyes narrow the smallest amount. It was a microscopic change, but I have always been good at noticing small changes. It's how you survive in a house where the weather can turn without warning. She said she did not know what I was talking about, and her voice had that careful softness she used when she wanted to sound like the mature one. I placed my phone on the table between us, screen facing up, like evidence in a case nobody wants to hear. The phone looked harmless, sleek, and black, a piece of daily life we both handled without fear. That was the funny thing about proof. It rarely looks dramatic until it speaks. I didn't play it right away. I let the silence do its work first, because silence is the one thing you cannot interrupt with confidence. She tapped her fingers against the counter, then stopped when she realized I was watching. She asked if I had been snooping, and the word came out sharp, not because she was angry, but because she was searching for a way to make me guilty. It was a familiar move, like watching someone reach for a light switch in a dark room, certain there would be something there if they kept searching. I told her I hadn't been snooping, and I didn't say it defensively, because defenses imply weakness. I said it like a fact you could write down. She took a breath that was supposed to look like patience. She told me she was tired, she had work in the morning, and we could talk about this later when I was calmer. It was a neat little box she tried to put the moment into, tape it shut, and push it into a closet. I had been that box before, tucked away for convenience, retrieved only when she needed something heavy carried or something expensive explained. I felt that cold behind my ribs spread a little further, like it was claiming territory. I asked her to sit down. She didn't, because sitting would have meant joining me in the reality I was creating. She stayed standing, which let her feel taller, in control, as if she could look down at me and make my doubt a form of obedience. She said my name the way people say a word when they want it to mean stop. She said I was imagining things, that I had been stressed lately, that I was reading into nothing because I always needed problems to solve. When she said I was overreacting, something in me went cold, in a way that felt permanent. Not dramatic, not explosive, not like a movie where a man slams his fist and storms out. It was quieter than that, and more dangerous, because it meant I was done trying to be understood. I wasn't angry at that moment. I was precise. Anger is noisy, and noise is what people use when they don't have facts. I touched the phone screen, and the brightness lit our faces like a confession booth. I didn't look at her while I found the voicemail. I already knew where it was, because I had listened to it enough times that I could have recited it in my sleep. That was the other funny thing about proof. It repeats itself perfectly, every time, and it never gets tired of being true. My thumb hovered over the play button for a second, not because I hesitated, but because I wanted to remember what it felt like to still have hope. "You're really going to do this," she said, and her voice tried to sound bored, like I was insisting on showing her a scratch on a car that wasn't there. Then the voicemail began, and her boredom died on the spot. At first, there was background noise, a muffled clink, maybe glass, maybe keys. Then there was her voice, not the voice she used with me, not the domestic voice that asked about dinner plans and whether I had remembered to pay the internet bill. It was lighter, breathier, a voice designed to be wanted. She laughed softly, and it was the kind of laugh she hadn't given me in a long time, as if joy had become a resource she only spent elsewhere. I watched her face change as she recognized herself. Her eyes widened and then went flat, like blinds being pulled down. She took a step forward, and her hand moved toward the phone on instinct, the way you reach for something falling. I didn't pull it away. I didn't need to. The phone was on the table in plain sight, and the sound was already in the room. There's a point where control becomes impossible, and all that's left is damage limitation. Her voice on the voicemail said a name, and I didn't repeat it out loud. I didn't have to. Names have weight, and I could feel that name land between us like a brick. Then she said something else, something small and casual that made it worse, because it meant this wasn't a single mistake. It meant it was routine. It meant there was a world she lived in that did not include me, and she had been comfortable enough in it to forget that phone's record, that accidents happen, that truth is sometimes left behind like a fingerprint. She whispered my name again, and this time it didn't mean stop. This time it meant please. She reached for the phone, and I let her fingers touch it, because I wanted her to feel how cold the glass was, how indifferent a device can be to a person's panic. She tried to hit stop, but my hand was already there, resting on the edge of the table like a boundary line. I didn't grab her wrist. I didn't threaten her. I just didn't move. The voicemail continued for a few more seconds, long enough for the meaning to become irreversible. Her voice said something about timing, about being careful, about how I didn't need to know. There was a softness in it that implied she believed she deserved secrecy, like it was a right, like honesty was something optional reserved for people who asked correctly. Then the message ended, and the kitchen returned to its quiet hum, except the quiet had changed. It was a different kind of silence now, heavy and awake. She stood there, lips parted, eyes searching my face like it was a door code she couldn't remember. She didn't deny it anymore, because denial is for when there's still room to wiggle. She switched tactics the way people do when they realize the first lie has collapsed. She said it wasn't what it sounded like, which was impressive, given that it sounded exactly like what it was. She said I had taken it out of context, which was funny, because context doesn't erase a voice saying a name with that kind of certainty. I asked her one question, and I asked it calmly. I asked how long. She didn't answer at first, because numbers make things real, and she was still trying to keep it abstract. She said I was being dramatic, even after the voicemail, because she couldn't help herself. Controlling the story was her favorite habit. It was the way she made reality flexible enough to fit her choices. I looked at her, and I realized something simple and ugly. She did not fear what she had done, she feared being caught. That difference mattered. It meant apology would be a performance, not a turning point. It meant tears would be a tool. It meant any promise she offered would be designed to get her back to comfort, not to repair damage. She started talking faster, words tumbling out as if speed could replace sincerity. She said she had been lonely. She said we had been distant. She said I worked too much, cared too little, listened too rarely. She built a case against me out of soft complaints and half-truths, because if she could make me the villain, then her betrayal could look like self-defense. It was a clever narrative, and I almost respected it the way you respect a well-made lock you didn't know existed until you needed to open a door. I let her talk because I was learning. Every sentence she said was a piece of her strategy, and I didn't plan to waste it. I listened like a man taking notes in his head, not a man trying to save his marriage. I nodded once when she said something that was technically true, because that made her believe I was still reachable. She mistook my calm for weakness, which was her second mistake of the night. Finally, she stopped. She waited for my response the way a person waits for a judge to announce a sentence. I didn't raise my voice, I didn't insult her, I didn't ask her to explain love or loyalty, because those words were too clean for what we were dealing with. I simply slid the phone a few inches closer to her, as if offering it back like a returned item. I told her the voicemail wasn't the worst part. Her eyes flickered, confused, and for the first time I saw a hint of fear that wasn't about being embarrassed. I told her the worst part was how quickly she tried to make me feel crazy for noticing. I told her the phrase, overreacting, was not a comfort, it was a weapon. I said it softly, and the softness made it land harder. She opened her mouth again, probably to reframe, to negotiate, to bargain her way out of consequences, but the cold inside me had finished forming. It had become something solid, something that could hold weight. I stood up, slowly, and I watched her track the movement like she expected a storm. There was no storm, and that was the problem. Storms pass. Cold settles. I told her we were going to do something very simple next. I told her we were going to stop arguing about feelings and start dealing with facts. She asked what that meant, and her voice cracked just enough to betray her confidence. I looked at the phone, then at her, and I said I already knew who that name belonged to. The moment her face confirmed it, I understood I didn't need guesses anymore. I didn't need to chase shadows. I didn't need to demand the truth from a woman who had made a hobby out of hiding it. I had something better than confession. I had a starting point, and I had her fear. She took a step back, and her heel bumped the cabinet with a dull knock. She asked me what I was going to do. I didn't answer right away, because she didn't deserve a preview. I reached for my phone, not to play the voicemail again, but to save it twice, to make sure it couldn't disappear with a quick swipe and a fake smile. She watched me with a new kind of attention, the kind you give a person you thought you controlled. When I finally looked up, my voice stayed even. I told her she could call it overreacting if that helped her sleep. I told her it wouldn't change what the voicemail had already said for her. Then I asked her to repeat one thing, just one, the exact detail she wanted me to believe about where she had been last night, because I wanted to see which lie she chose first. And the way she hesitated told me I was about to hear something that would make the voicemail look polite. She hesitated in a way that made time feel thick, like the air in the kitchen had turned into something you could push aside with your hands. And I realized she wasn't choosing the truth. She was choosing which version of reality would cost her the least if I didn't bite. Her eyes went to the sink, then to the hallway, then back to me, scanning for exits the way a person scans for a door in a building that suddenly smells like smoke. She finally said she had been with coworkers, that it was an informal thing after a late project push, and she tried to anchor it with a smile that was meant to look casual, but came out strained. I nodded once like I accepted it, not because I believed her, but because I wanted her to keep talking while she still thought she could steer. People lie best when they feel safe, and she had spent years training me to play the part of a man who second-guesses his own instincts. That training was over, but I let her think it wasn't, because I didn't need a fight yet. I needed a pattern. She added details quickly, the way children add stickers to a broken toy, hoping decoration will substitute for function. She said the restaurant was noisy. She said her phone battery had been low. She said she didn't want to wake me when she came in. And she said she had deleted messages because her storage was full, because apparently the only thing my wife had ever been guilty of was good housekeeping. I glanced at the clock on the microwave, partly out of habit and partly because I wanted the room to feel normal while it wasn't. The time read 12:18, and the numbers were sharp and indifferent, the kind of digital truth that doesn't care about anyone's tone. She kept talking, her voice warming up as she convinced herself I was sliding back into my usual role, the role where I rationalized her behavior for her, as if I was hired to manage her guilt. She said she loved me. She said I was making a mistake. And then she said something that landed wrong, not because it was cruel, but because it sounded practiced. She said I needed to stop spiraling. That word, spiraling, sat there like a smear on clean glass. It wasn't a word she used naturally, not with me. Not in our dumb little arguments about laundry detergent or whether we should replace the aging coffee machine. Spiraling sounded like therapy language someone had handed her, a tool to turn my reaction into a symptom instead of a response. I didn't react, and I watched her notice that too, the way her shoulders tightened when she didn't get the effect she expected. I told her I wasn't spiraling, and my voice came out steady enough to surprise her. I told her I was simply asking for one clear timeline, and I said it like I was asking for a receipt at a store, not like I was asking my wife to stop lying. She stared at me, and I could see her recalculating. If she fought me, she risked looking guilty. If she complied, she risked the details not matching something I already knew. She chose a middle path, which is what liars do when they're trying to keep options open. She said she got to the restaurant around 9, she said she left around 11, and she said she drove home. It was clean, it was simple, and it had just enough structure to sound believable. The problem was, she didn't realize I wasn't collecting a story, I was collecting points of friction. Real nights have friction, tiny annoyances, and specific moments that stick. Lies glide too smoothly, like a car with the tires removed. I asked her which restaurant, and she named one we'd been to twice, the kind of place with trendy lighting and small plates that cost too much. It was a smart choice, because it made it harder for me to argue. I nodded again, and I could see relief flicker in her face, the relief of a person who thinks the trap is closing on someone else. I picked up my phone and didn't open anything yet. I just held it, letting her eyes follow it like it was a weapon. I told her I had one more question, and I watched her brace for it. I asked her why her voicemail sounded like she was somewhere quieter, and her expression froze for half a second before she recovered. She said she must have stepped outside. She said she must have pocket dialed. She said she didn't know how it happened. Her voice sharpened at the end of the sentence, because she was annoyed at the universe for leaving her a mess to clean up. I walked to the counter, opened a drawer, and pulled out a pen. It wasn't dramatic, just domestic, but I saw her eyes change when she realized what I was doing. I took a sheet of paper from the junk drawer, the one with old coupons and a magnet holding it closed, and I wrote down the times she had just given me, 9 to 11, drove home. I didn't write her explanations, just the claims. Then I turned the paper toward her without speaking. She stared at it, and her throat moved like she was swallowing something unpleasant. I told her I was going to ask her to keep her story consistent, because I was tired of guesswork. She said I was being controlling, and the word came out quickly, a reflex. I didn't respond to that either, because labels were her hobby and facts were mine. I told her I wasn't controlling her. I was controlling my reality, and I could see how much she hated that sentence, because it meant I wasn't volunteering to be confused anymore. She tried a new angle and asked me why I couldn't just trust her. That question would have worked on me a month ago, maybe even a week ago, when I still believed trust was something you could choose like a nicer pair of shoes. But there are moments when trust stops being a virtue and starts being stupidity, and I was tired of being the kind of man who looked stupid in his own home. I told her trust was what we had before the voicemail, and then I let that sit between us like a body on the floor, not moving, not negotiable. The kitchen was so quiet that I could hear the refrigerator click, that small mechanical sound that reminded me the world keeps running even when your life breaks. She stepped closer to the table, and I saw her eyes flick toward the phone again. She wanted it. She wanted to erase it. She wanted to press her thumb against the screen and make it go away the way she had made other things go away. Inconvenient emotions, uncomfortable conversations, my own instincts. I didn't stop her with my hands. I stopped her by moving the phone into my pocket with a calm motion that told her it wasn't up for discussion. She asked me what I wanted, and there was a tremor of real fear now, because she could sense I wasn't chasing a confession. I was building something. I told her I wanted clarity. I told her I wanted honesty. I told her I wanted to know how long this had been going on, and I said it without raising my voice. Because raised voices are for men who still believe shouting can fix something. Her eyes narrowed, and her jaw tightened, and she said it wasn't an affair, as if the label was the problem, not the behavior. I didn't argue the label. I asked her what she called it then, if she was leaving voicemails for another man and talking to him like she didn't want the call to end. She flinched at that, not because it was cruel, but because it was accurate. She said he was a friend. She said he understood her. She said she felt unheard at home. She said the words in a row like she was reading off a menu. It sounded like something she had rehearsed in her head during quiet moments, the kind of moments I had mistakenly thought she spent thinking about us. I sat back down, and the chair legs scraped softly against the tile, and that little sound made her jump. She was on edge now, and that was good, because people make mistakes when their nerves are loud. I asked her if she wanted water, and she looked confused by the question, because she was expecting confrontation, not normalcy. I poured myself water instead, took one sip, then set the glass down carefully. I told her we were done arguing for the night. She looked relieved again, like she thought this was my version of surrender. Then I told her I was going to sleep in the guest room, not because I needed space, but because I needed my mind clear. Her relief vanished. Space is what liars fear, because space is where the story falls apart without constant management. She followed me down the hallway as I turned off lights, and she tried to keep her voice soft and reasonable, like she was negotiating with a client. She said we shouldn't make rash decisions. She said we should talk in the morning. She said she didn't want me to punish her for something that wasn't even real. I paused at the guest room door and turned toward her. The hallway light framed her face in a way that made her look younger and more vulnerable, and for a second I saw the woman I married, the one who used to laugh openly and lean her head on my shoulder without thinking. Then she spoke again, and the image cracked. She said, very carefully, that if I kept acting like this, I was going to ruin everything. She didn't say she was sorry. She said I would ruin everything. It was perfect, that sentence, because it told me exactly what I needed to know about how she saw the world. I told her I wasn't ruining anything. I was finally noticing what she had already ruined. Then I closed the guest room door, not hard, just closed, and the click of the latch sounded like a period at the end of a sentence. I didn't sleep much. The mattress was too firm and the room smelled faintly of clean sheets and storage, like it wasn't meant for living. My mind kept replaying the voicemail, not the words, but the tone, the intimacy, the ease. Around 2 a.m, I heard her footsteps in the hallway, slow and quiet. She stopped outside the door for a moment, and the silence stretched, and I could almost hear her thinking. Then she walked away. That told me she was planning. She wasn't coming to apologize. She was coming to calculate. At 6:04, my alarm went off, and I turned it off before it could ring twice. The house was quiet again, but it was a different quiet than yesterday. It felt like a stage before the curtain rises, like something was waiting. I got dressed in the dim light, moved through the kitchen without turning on the overheads, and made coffee. The smell filled the room, familiar and comforting, and I almost laughed at how absurd it was that coffee could still matter when your marriage was bleeding out. She came in at 6:23, already dressed, hair pulled back, makeup minimal but precise. She looked like a woman ready for a meeting, not a woman who had been caught. She greeted me like nothing had happened, which was either bravery or denial, and I wasn't sure which yet. She poured herself coffee, leaned against the counter, and asked if we were still doing this. I asked what she meant, and she said this, meaning my refusal to accept her story. I didn't answer immediately. Instead, I reached into a drawer and pulled out the phone bill that had arrived the day before, still unopened, still sitting there like a sealed envelope in a courtroom. I placed it on the table between us and watched her eyes lock on it. She didn't touch it. She didn't even pretend to be curious. Her face hardened in a way that told me she already knew what was in there, or at least she suspected, and she was terrified of the numbers. I slid the envelope closer and told her we weren't doing feelings anymore. We were doing facts. She tried to laugh, but it came out thin. She asked why I had the phone bill, as if the bill belonged to someone else's household. I told her it arrived at our address, and that made it our problem. Then I opened it slowly, not because I needed drama, but because I wanted her to feel every second of the truth approaching. Paper slid out, crisp and official, rows of numbers, columns of timestamps, the kind of document that doesn't care about charm. I scanned it quickly, then looked up at her. Her face was still, too still, like she was trying to control her breathing. I didn't read it all aloud. I didn't need to. I just pointed at the total near the top and said the number once, quietly, like a verdict. Her lips parted. Her eyes darted. Then she snapped back into defense and said those were just texts, that people text, that it didn't mean anything. The speed of her response told me she had prepared for this possibility, which meant she had known it could happen. I asked her one simple thing, and I asked it like a man asking for the time. I asked who the number belonged to. She stared at me for a long moment, and in that moment I understood she wasn't going to tell the truth voluntarily, not because she didn't know it, but because she couldn't accept the consequences of saying it out loud. She was a woman who believed that reality was negotiable as long as you never said the dangerous words. So I tapped the page once, then again, and I told her I already knew, because the voicemail had given it away, and because she had just confirmed it with her silence. And the way her face collapsed told me I had just found the first crack in a wall she'd been building for a long time. I did not say his name right away, because saying it would have turned the kitchen into a courtroom, and I was not ready to hand her the comfort of a shouting match that could later be framed as my instability. I watched her eyes flick down to the page again, then to my pocket where my phone rested, and then back to the hallway as if distance could dissolve numbers, and I realized she was not processing guilt as much as she was calculating damage control. I asked her to sit, and when she refused, I stayed seated anyway, because power in a moment like this is not volume, it is stillness. She tried to go on the offensive, not with rage, but with a soft, wounded tone that had convinced me before, and she said I was obsessing, that she had friends, that texting did not equal betrayal, and that I was letting one misunderstood voicemail turn me into someone she did not recognize. The way she said someone she did not recognize was almost funny, because the man she recognized was the one who swallowed doubts to keep the peace, and the man in front of her now was the one who could finally hear the difference between peace and silence. I told her the voicemail was not misunderstood, and I told her the phone bill was not a coincidence, and I told her I wanted one thing that morning, which was the truth attached to a name. Her jaw tightened, and the mask slipped for a second, and she said a name in a way that felt like throwing a plate onto tile, a soundless break that still left shards. His name was Grant Keller, and the way she said it told me she expected me to react like a man in a bad movie, because she braced for raised fists and wild accusations, and she almost looked disappointed when I simply repeated the name back to her, slowly, like I was filing it into a drawer. I asked her who he was, and she said he was nothing. Then she said he was a colleague. Then she said he had been helping her with a project. And by the third answer, I could already see the shape of the lie, because truth does not need to change outfits that quickly. I told her I was going to work, and she laughed sharply, as if the idea of normal routine was absurd. But the truth was, routine was the only thing keeping me from doing something stupid. I put the phone bill back into the envelope, I set it in a kitchen drawer where it could not disappear, and I walked past her without touching her, without pleading, without demanding a confession that would never be clean anyway. She followed me to the front door and tried to make it sound like I was the one abandoning the marriage, and she said we could talk later if I calmed down, and I almost admired the nerve it took to demand calm from the person she had set on fire. Outside, the air was cold enough to sting, and I breathed in until my chest stopped feeling tight. Then I exhaled slowly, because my body wanted to sprint and my mind wanted to plan. I got into my car and sat there for a full minute, hands on the steering wheel, eyes on the quiet street, and I made a decision that felt like a line drawn in permanent ink. I was not going to chase her around the house begging for honesty, and I was not going to run to friends begging for validation, because both moves would give her something to use later, a picture of me as emotional and reckless. Instead, I was going to do what I always did when something stopped making sense, which was to write it down, confirm it, and build a timeline that could not be argued with. At work, I barely listened to anyone, because every normal conversation felt like someone talking through a wall, and I kept replaying her answers, not because they hurt, but because they were sloppy. Lunch came and went, and I used the quiet time to pull up my phone plan account on my own device, using information I already had because it was a shared household account, and I looked for the call log that matched the voicemail timestamp she had accidentally left me. I did not need to break passwords or guess codes because the account was already mine as much as hers, and the system did not care about emotion, it cared about credentials. I found the entry, and the timestamp lined up with the night that had lodged in my head, and I took a screenshot, then another showing the number beside the time, and I saved both into a folder labeled with the date, because if I learned anything from watching people destroy each other in divorces, it was that vague memory loses to documented detail every time. On the drive home, I stopped at a print shop, not because I enjoyed the idea of printing my own pain, but because paper has weight, and weight changes how people treat information. I printed the call log screenshot, and I printed the page from the bill showing the total number of texts, and I printed a simple month view from our shared calendar that showed where she claimed she had been on several of the nights she had worked late, because I remembered those nights now with different eyes, and I remembered how often she had come home smelling like a bar she never admitted going to. I did not highlight anything yet, and I did not annotate, because I did not want my own hand to be the story. I wanted the dates to speak first. When I walked back into the house, she was in the kitchen again, as if she had been waiting for the next round, and she tried to look busy, but her eyes were too sharp and her movements were too controlled. She asked where I had been, and I told her I had been doing what adults do when they get lied to, which is confirming facts. She tried to grab the envelope from the drawer, and I shut it calmly with my hand over it, not in a violent way, but in a way that made it clear she was not erasing this. She stared at my hand like it offended her, and I realized she was not angry that she had betrayed me. She was angry that the betrayal had become measurable. She shifted tactics and offered partial truth, the kind that sounds brave but is really just strategic damage control. She said Grant was going through a hard time. She said he had been talking to her about his divorce. She said he needed support, and she said she had deleted messages because she knew I would overreact. The phrase overreact showed up again, like a stamp someone had pressed into her vocabulary, and I felt that cold return in my chest, not because she used the word, but because she used it like a shield. I asked her, slowly and clearly, how many texts she would consider supportive before it crossed into something else, and she opened her mouth, then closed it, because you cannot defend 7,000 messages without admitting you were building a second life. I did not ask her to hand me her phone because I was not playing that game, and I did not follow her around the room because that would turn me into the frantic spouse she could describe later. I simply told her I was going to document everything from this point forward, and I said it in a tone that sounded boring, because boring is terrifying when you are trying to control the narrative. She scoffed and called me dramatic. Then she said I was acting like a lawyer, and I almost smiled at that, because she was not wrong. I told her I was acting like someone who wanted the truth to stay true even when she tried to bend it. She went upstairs, and I heard drawers opening and closing, and I knew she was either deleting more things or preparing a version of herself that looked innocent. I took a notebook from the shelf in the living room, the kind we had bought for grocery lists and never used, and I wrote down a simple header: dates, times, claims, proof. Under it, I wrote the voicemail time, the call log time, the number, and her first cover story. Then I wrote her second cover story, then her third. Seeing them stacked on a page made the situation feel less like heartbreak and more like fraud, and that was oddly calming because fraud can be proven. That night, she tried to act like nothing had changed, which was almost impressive in its cruelty, and she asked what I wanted for dinner as if dinner was the problem we needed to solve. I told her I would handle my own food, and she snapped that I was punishing her, and I told her I was protecting myself. After she went to bed, I stayed up, not out of revenge, but out of necessity, and I went through our shared calendar again, not for private messages, but for patterns, because patterns do not need passwords. I noticed recurring blocks labeled committee work on nights that never seemed to produce any results, and I noticed how often those blocks matched long gaps in her responsiveness when I tried to reach her, and I noticed how often she had described those nights as stressful, as if stress was a reasonable excuse for secrecy. I opened our shared photo album on the cloud account we both used, and I scrolled carefully, not looking for anything scandalous, but looking for metadata, timestamps, and odd gaps. I found a set of pictures from a charity event we had attended a month earlier, pictures of the venue and decorations and our smiling faces, and nothing about them looked suspicious until I noticed one image taken at the edge of the frame, a blurry shot that looked accidental. In the corner, half hidden behind a shoulder, was a man's face that I did not recognize at first, because I had not been looking for him then, and because she had positioned our life so I would never have to. I zoomed in just enough to confirm the features, and then I stopped, because I did not need to make it dramatic by enlarging it into a portrait. I took a screenshot that showed the date and time visible at the top, and I saved it. The next morning, she was nicer than usual, which was how I knew she was scared. She made coffee, she asked if I had slept, she touched my arm lightly as if physical contact could rewrite the last 48 hours, and when I did not respond the way she expected, her eyes hardened again. She asked me what I was doing, and I told her I was building clarity. She said I was trying to ruin her, and I told her she was confusing consequences with cruelty. She asked me what I planned to do with my little folder of screenshots, and I told her I planned to keep it, because I was done trusting promises that evaporated at 3:47 in the morning. She stormed out of the house, and I listened to her car pull away, and for a moment the quiet felt like relief. But it was not relief. It was the pause before escalation. I knew she would contact Grant now, and I knew she would try to synchronize stories, because that is what people do when their lie is exposed. I did not need to spy to predict that, because I had lived with her long enough to understand her survival instincts. The question was not whether she would try to control the narrative, but how quickly she would try to paint me as the unstable obstacle to her innocent friendship. So I did the only thing I could do without breaking any rules or losing my dignity, and I made the truth portable. I printed the evidence I already had, I put it into clear sleeves, I wrote dates in the corner, and I tucked it into a plain folder that looked like tax documents, because people respect boring folders. Then I sat at the kitchen table and wrote a one-page timeline in clean, simple lines, and I signed the bottom with the date. Not because my signature made it more true, but because it marked the moment I stopped negotiating with lies. When she came home later that day and saw the folder on the table, Her face went pale in a way she could not fake away, and she asked me, in a small voice she did not use often, who else knew? I looked up from the paper, and I answered her honestly, because honesty is easier when you have finally committed to it. I told her no one else knew yet, but I also told her that was not a promise. It was a timeline, and timelines move forward whether you like them or not. She opened her mouth to argue, to minimize, to demand mercy, and then her phone buzzed on the counter, and even from where I sat, I saw the lock screen preview flash just long enough to show one name, one message, and the beginning of a sentence that made my stomach settle into something heavy and calm. Grant had written that they needed to get their story straight before I did something public. The screen lit up like a small confession that thought it could vanish again, and I did not even need to touch her phone to read enough of it, because the first line carried the whole story the way smoke carries the shape of the fire. I watched her eyes flick down to the counter, and then back to me, and I saw the exact moment she understood that the fight was no longer about feelings, because it had become about records and timing and what could be proved without anyone raising a voice. She reached for the phone too quickly, and speed always betrays intent, because no one panics over harmless messages unless they know how bad the rest look. I moved my hand, not to grab it from her, but to slide the phone closer to me with one slow motion that made her stop. Because I was not acting like a jealous husband anymore. I was acting like someone who had already accepted the outcome and was simply collecting the missing pieces. She called me controlling, because that is the word people use when they lose control, and she demanded her phone back because demands are easier than explanations, and explanations are hard when you have been rewriting reality for weeks. I picked up my own phone and opened the camera, and I did it openly, because secrecy would give her something to argue about later, and I took a clean photo of her screen while the preview still glowed, making sure the time in the corner was visible and the message snippet was legible. The moment the shutter clicked, her face changed, not into rage, but into that tight, calculating fear people get when they realize a door has locked behind them, and she said that was illegal, which was almost funny, because she had been living in the land of invented rules for so long that she assumed the real ones would bend too. I told her I was photographing a screen in my own kitchen, on a device sitting on my own counter, and if she wanted to argue laws, she could do it with someone paid to listen. She tried a softer angle next, and she asked if we could just talk like adults, which was her favorite move when she needed a reset, because it gave her a chance to steer the conversation back into vague emotions where facts feel rude. I told her we could talk, but we were not starting with her feelings, because her feelings had already gotten 7,000 chances, to be honest, and had used them to delete messages at 3:47 in the morning. She said the voicemail was taken out of context. Then she said Grant was pushing her. Then she said she felt lonely, and the way the excuses marched out in a neat line made it clear they had been rehearsed because guilt is messy, but a prepared defense is smooth. I asked her one question, and I asked it without raising my voice, because a calm question is harder to dodge than a shouted accusation. I asked her why Grant was telling her they needed to get their story straight before I did something public, if there was nothing to hide and no story to coordinate. She opened her mouth, then closed it, then tried to laugh, and the laugh came out thin and high, like a bad imitation of confidence. She told me I was twisting things, and I told her the only thing twisting was her logic, and it was starting to snap. She grabbed her phone, and she did something fast with her thumb that I did not need to see to understand, because I knew exactly what deleting looked like on her hands now. I did not lunge or wrestle or demand access, because I was not going to give her the satisfaction of turning me into a spectacle inside my own home. I simply said I had already captured what I needed, and the rest of her cleanup effort could be added to the timeline as behavior, because behavior is evidence too, just the kind people hate admitting. That night, she tried to sleep in our bed as if nothing had happened, and I stayed in the living room, not out of drama, but because I wanted distance from her performance. The house felt different, Not haunted, not tragic, just stripped, like a room after a party where the music has stopped and the mess is visible. I sat at the coffee table with my folder and my notebook, and I wrote down the exact time of the lock screen preview, and I wrote down the words I had seen, and I wrote down her reaction, because reaction is often the most honest part of a liar. Then I printed the photo I had taken, because paper makes people careful, and I slid it into a clear sleeve with the date on a label, because if she wanted to claim later that I made it up, she would have to explain why the timestamp matched everything else. In the morning, she acted injured, as if my calm was cruelty, and she told me I was obsessed, and she told me I was destroying our marriage with paranoia. I listened without interrupting, because letting someone speak is sometimes the fastest way to show how empty their story is, and when she finally ran out of words, I told her something simple that made her blink. I told her the marriage was not being destroyed by my attention. It was being destroyed by her secrecy, and I was only documenting the collapse because she had decided to deny it while it happened. She asked what I wanted, and I told her I wanted clarity, which is the one thing cheaters hate, because clarity does not leave room for plausible deniability. She offered compromise instead of truth, and she offered therapy instead of answers, and she offered promises that would require me to forget the last 2 weeks as if my memory was a light switch. I told her I was not here to negotiate my perception, and I asked her for Grant's number, the one she had texted 7,439 times, and I asked her for one reason those texts could not be shown to me if they were harmless. She said she needed privacy, and I almost applauded the audacity of using privacy as a shield after turning our shared life into a secret side project. I did not call the number, and I did not text it because I was not interested in becoming part of their script. Instead, I opened our phone plan account again, and I pulled up the detailed usage page that showed the number and the volume, and I took clean screenshots that included the account header, the billing cycle, and the totals, because totals matter, and context matters, and partial screenshots invite arguments. Then I printed those pages and placed them behind the voicemail record and the lock screen photo, building a stack that told one simple story. This was not an accident. This was a routine. Later that afternoon, I checked our shared calendar, and I did not have to dig deep to find contradictions, because contradictions float to the surface when you stop accepting vague answers. I noticed a recurring block she labeled committee work, and I noticed it appeared on nights she claimed she was unreachable, and I noticed that a family friend had mentioned, casually, that the committee meeting was canceled 2 weeks ago due to a scheduling issue. That detail would have slid right past me before, but now it landed like a brick, because it meant she had been using a meeting that did not exist as an alibi, and an alibi does not exist unless someone expects to be questioned. I called the family friend, and I did not ask about cheating, because direct questions make people defensive, and defensive people become unreliable. I asked, lightly, whether the committee meetings had resumed because I was trying to plan around schedules, and I let silence do the work after the question. The friend told me the same thing, that the meetings had been paused, and she sounded a little confused about why my wife had said otherwise. I thanked her, ended the call, and wrote down the date and the exact wording in my notebook, because a neutral line from an uninvolved person is often stronger than 100 emotional accusations. When my wife came home, I did not confront her with it right away, because I wanted to see what she chose to say, unprompted, and unprompted stories are where liars slip. She offered a cheerful explanation for why she was late, and she used the same committee work phrase again, and I watched her face carefully when she said it, because she could not keep her eyes steady. I asked, gently, which committee member was leading the meeting now, and she paused for half a beat, then named someone who had moved out of town last year, which was the kind of error that happens when you tell a lie you no longer track. I nodded as if I believed her, and I wrote it down later as a contradiction, because contradictions are the nails that keep the timeline standing. She grew restless as the days passed, because she sensed that my silence was not surrender, and she tried to provoke me into a fight, because a fight would let her claim we were both guilty of chaos. She accused me of punishing her. She accused me of being cold. She accused me of trying to humiliate her. And I listened while making dinner, because cooking a normal meal while someone attacks you is its own kind of power. When she finally demanded to know what I was going to do, I told her I was going to make sure the truth did not depend on my mood, and that seemed to scare her more than anger ever could. That evening, she left the room with her phone pressed to her ear, and she spoke in a hushed voice that she pretended was about work, but the words came out tight and urgent, and I caught enough fragments to know she was talking to him. She shut the door to the bedroom, and I did not follow, because following would make me a character in their drama, and I was done being cast in roles without my consent. I sat at the dining table and opened my folder, and I arranged the papers in order, and I realized I did not just have evidence of an affair, I had evidence of coordination, because that lock screen message was not romantic, it was tactical. The next morning, a small thing happened that would have meant nothing before, and meant everything now. A merchant alert popped up on my phone from an account in my name, showing a late-night charge from a restaurant I had never been to with her, and the time matched one of her committee work blocks. The amount was not huge, which was almost insulting, because it meant she assumed small spending would slip through unnoticed. I took a screenshot of the alert, then I logged into the account and saved the transaction line, and I printed both, because a payment is a physical footprint, and footprints are hard to argue with. When she came downstairs, she was already tense, as if she had spent the night drafting a script, and she asked why I was up so early. I told her I had slept fine, because I had finally stopped hoping she would save herself with honesty, and that truth had made my mind quiet. She looked at the folder on the table, and she asked what else I had, and I told her I had enough to stop being gaslit, and enough to make decisions without guessing. She demanded to see it, and I refused, not because I enjoyed withholding, but because giving her access would only teach her what to hide better. She tried one last angle, and she said we should keep this private, because public shame would hurt both of us. And I almost admired the way she framed her fear as my responsibility. I told her privacy was a privilege of people who act with integrity, and she had traded that privilege for secrecy, one deleted message at a time. Then I told her something that made her face drain of color again, because it was the first hint that my plan was not just to catch her, it was to outlast her. I told her I was no longer chasing her confession, and I was no longer asking her to stop, because stopping now would not erase what already existed. She asked what that meant, and I looked her in the eyes long enough for the question to feel heavy. I told her it meant the next time she said I was overreacting, she would be doing it in front of someone who writes minutes, or someone who enforces policy, or someone who cannot be sweet-talked into forgetting timestamps. She tried to protest, but her voice sounded smaller because the room had shifted, and she felt it. Her phone buzzed again, and she flinched as if the device itself had turned against her, and I realized that was the real punishment of betrayal, because eventually every little notification becomes a threat. I stood, picked up my folder, and walked it to a drawer she could not reach without making a scene, and I locked the drawer with a small key I kept on my ring, not to be dramatic, but to be final. I told her we were going to a public event in a few days, something she had insisted we attend for appearances, and I told her we would go as planned. She asked why I would still go after everything, and I said because truth deserves witnesses and lies deserve bright lights. Her eyes narrowed, and she asked what I was planning, and I gave her the smallest smile I had given her in weeks, because she deserved the uncertainty she had forced me to live in. I told her I was planning nothing she could call unfair, and nothing she could call illegal, and nothing she could erase at 3:47 in the morning. Then I walked past her, calm and steady, and I heard her whisper my name like a warning, and I knew she had finally understood the difference between a man who argues and a man who records. That night, I lay on the couch again, and I stared at the ceiling with my phone on my chest, feeling its weight like a promise. I opened the photo of the lock screen message one more time, and I read it slowly, because the words were not just fear, they were strategy, and strategy is what collapses when the timeline gets shared. I closed my eyes and pictured the upcoming event, the kind of room where people pretend to listen while they count social value, and I imagined what it would feel like to set down one verified fact and let silence do the rest. And as I drifted toward sleep, I understood something simple that made me almost grateful for how careless they had been. They were rushing to get their story straight, which meant they knew a story was all they had, and stories break the moment they meet documents. I woke before dawn with that quiet clarity that only shows up after you stop begging for the version of someone you married and start dealing with the person who actually lives in your house. The living room was cold, the kind of cold that makes your skin remember every sentence you wish you could take back, and my phone lay on the cushion beside me like a witness I could trust. Upstairs, she moved once, a soft creak in the floorboards, then silence again, like she was trying to pretend the last few weeks were a bad dream that would dissolve if she kept her eyes closed. I made coffee and kept the lights dim, not because I was hiding, but because I did not want a dramatic morning that would feed her need for chaos. The folder stayed locked away, yet the facts were not locked anywhere. They were already in my head, arranged into a timeline so clean it felt like it had always been there. I opened my notes and added 2 lines from the night before. Her flinch at the notification, and the way she said my name like it was a threat. When someone starts using your name like a weapon, it means they are losing their grip on the story. She came downstairs in leggings and a sweatshirt, hair pulled back too tight, face carefully neutral, like she had spent the night practicing in the mirror. She avoided the drawer where I kept the folder, avoided my eyes, and went straight to the sink to rinse a mug that was already clean. The performance was almost impressive, if you enjoy watching people fold themselves into shapes they hope will pass as innocence. She told me she had a busy day, and she said it the way someone announces a schedule to create an alibi in advance. I nodded and asked what time she would be home, because I was thinking about dinner, because I was thinking about normal things, because I was refusing to play the game where I become the suspicious husband pacing the windows. She gave me a time, then corrected it again, and every correction landed like a small bell ringing in a quiet church. She left with a kiss near my cheek that didn't touch skin long enough to count as affection. The door shut, and the house breathed out. I waited 5 full minutes before moving, not because I expected her to burst back in, but because patience is a habit, and habits keep you steady when emotions want to grab the wheel. I did not follow her. I did not call her. I did not text the number on the bill. I did what I had been doing since the night I caught her deleting messages at 3:47 a.m., which was build truth out of small, lawful pieces that couldn't be argued away. I went to my desk and opened the shared calendar. That so-called committee block was still there, sitting smugly in the week view like a fake name on a guest list. I exported the week view as a PDF and printed it, because paper has a weight that screenshots don't, and weight changes how people behave. Then, I did something I had been avoiding, not because it was hard, but because it made things real. I called the venue for the event she insisted we attend in a few days, the one she framed as important for our image, our network, our future. It was a fundraiser dinner for a local nonprofit that a friend of hers had helped organize, which meant there would be people, witnesses, and the kind of polite social hunger that turns gossip into currency. I did not ask questions like a jealous spouse. I asked like a man making sure logistics were correct, because I was. The coordinator was polite, tired, and efficient. I asked if our table assignment had been confirmed and whether the seating chart had been finalized. She said it would be finalized 48 hours before the event, but she could confirm our RSVP and meal preferences. Then she added, casually, that there had been a late change request for our party, and she said it like it was routine. My chest stayed still, but something inside me focused the way a camera lens snaps into clarity. I asked what the change request was, and I kept my tone neutral. She checked a note and said there had been a request to add a +1 name under my wife's contact information. She said it was likely a mistake and could be cleared up at check-in. She offered the name, and when she said it, my hand tightened on the edge of my desk so hard the wood bit into my skin. Grant Hale. I thanked her and told her I would handle it. I did not argue, and I did not let my voice change, because there was nothing to argue about. This was not a rumor or a vibe or an interpretation. This was a documented request tied to a public event, attached to my wife's contact details, made without my knowledge, and it explained the urgency in that lock screen message better than any confession ever could. I wrote it down in my notebook, and I wrote it as if I were writing a report: date, time, who said it, what exactly was said. Then I printed the email confirmation she offered to send, which arrived a minute later with the venue header and the coordinator's signature. I slid it into a new clear sleeve and labeled it with the date. When I looked at the stack, it felt less like a folder and more like a trap that had already been sprung, and the only thing left was letting the target realize the net was around them. The rest of the day moved with a strange calm. I went to work, did what I needed to do, answered emails, attended meetings, smiled when required. In between tasks, I checked the phone account again and requested a detailed usage page for the billing cycle. It wasn't illegal, it wasn't sneaky, it was my account, my plan, my line, my name on the statement. I downloaded the document, highlighted the number with the volume, and printed the page that showed the total texts. 7,439. Not a few, not work, not a friend. A relationship built on constant contact, the kind of contact that eats a marriage from the inside. That evening, she came home later than she said she would, and her eyes were brighter than usual, like she had been laughing recently. She tried to carry that brightness into the house, tried to make it contagious, tried to make it normal. She asked how my day was, and the softness in her voice was almost tender, which would have fooled me 2 months ago. Now it sounded like a person rehearsing care because care was useful. I told her my day was fine. I asked how hers was. She said the committee work had been brutal. She said there were last-minute issues with seating, and she made a face like she was annoyed at the organizers. That detail almost made me laugh out loud, because she didn't know she had just walked right into the evidence and left fingerprints all over it. I did not confront her immediately. I asked questions as if I were interested. I asked who was sitting at her table. She waved it off and said the organizer handled it, and she said the organizer's name with a little irritation, like she was annoyed at someone who could accidentally reveal the truth. I asked if there were any special guests, and she said yes, but she wasn't sure who yet, and she shrugged like it was no big deal. A shrug is a great hiding place when your story is thin. We ate dinner, and I watched her talk, because people tell the truth with their bodies long before they tell it with their words. She checked her phone face down on her thigh under the table, quick glances she thought I couldn't see. She smiled at nothing. She took a sip of water and held it in her mouth for half a second too long, like she needed time to swallow a lie. After dinner, she asked if I was still going to the fundraiser with her. The question was too casual, too light, as if she were asking whether I wanted coffee. I looked at her and answered yes, and the relief that flickered across her face made my stomach turn. She thought my attendance meant control. She thought it meant she could manage the room. She thought it meant she could keep the story stable. Then she pushed, just a little. She asked if I was still upset about the voicemail, and she rolled her eyes in a way that was almost practiced. She said it again, the phrase I had come to recognize as her emergency exit, that I was overreacting. She said it softly, like she was being reasonable, like she was the adult in the room trying to calm a child. Something in me did go cold, but not in a dramatic way. It went cold in the way metal goes cold when it is being shaped into a tool. I stood up, walked to the living room, and came back with my phone. I set it on the table between us like a neutral object. I didn't threaten her. I didn't raise my voice. I simply told her I wanted her to hear something again, because the first time she left it by accident. And accidents do not get mercy when they reveal intent. Her face tightened. She told me to stop. She told me this was unhealthy. She told me I was trying to punish her. The words came fast now because she sensed the floor shifting. I stared at her with the calm of someone who had already crossed the emotional river and was standing on the other bank watching her flail. I played the voicemail. The sound filled the kitchen in a way that made the air feel thick. Her voice was there, a little breathless, a little excited, saying things she had denied saying, with his voice in the background, casual and confident, like a man who thought he had already won. She reached out to grab the phone, but I slid it back with 2 fingers and kept it playing. I didn't yank it away. I didn't make it a fight. I made it a fact. When it ended, there was silence so clean it felt like the house itself was listening. She stared at the table, and her lips moved as if she was trying to form a sentence that could reverse time. Then she looked up and tried again with the only weapon she had left, the one that had worked for years: indignation. She told me it was private. She told me it was complicated. She told me I didn't understand what she was going through. She tried to turn it into a story about her pain, because pain is easier to sympathize with than betrayal. I let her speak until she ran out of steam. Then I asked her one question, and I asked it gently, because gentleness makes the truth feel heavier when it drops. I asked why she tried to add Grant Hale as a +1 under her contact name for our fundraiser table. Her eyes snapped to mine so fast it was almost violent. She went still, like a deer that just heard the safety click off a rifle. I watched her brain race, watched her try to build a bridge out of nothing, watched her look for a way to make that detail seem normal. She opened her mouth, and no sound came out. Then she swallowed and tried to laugh, but the laugh died halfway, because laughter can't carry a lie when the paperwork is already printed. She asked where I heard that, and her voice was sharp now, because the mask had slipped. She demanded to know who told me. She accused me of spying. She accused me of humiliating her. She moved through the usual defenses, like a person flipping through channels looking for a program that still works. I told her no one told me anything personal. I told her I called the venue like a husband confirming logistics. I told her they mentioned the change request as a routine detail, and I told her routine details are where liars drown. She stood up so quickly her chair scraped the floor. She said I was trying to ruin her life. She said I was making her feel unsafe. She said she couldn't believe the man she married had become this. The irony would have been funny if it hadn't been so familiar. When people get caught, they don't confess first. They accuse first. I stayed seated. I looked up at her as if she were a stranger making a scene in my kitchen. I told her she could stop any time by telling the truth, but she would rather fight reality than admit she created it. Her phone buzzed on the counter. She froze. She glanced at it, and the lock screen lit up just long enough for me to see the name, because she was careless when she was scared. Grant. She lunged for it, but I didn't. I didn't need to. I had already seen enough. My hand moved to my own phone, and I took a photo of her screen again, clean and simple, with the time visible, and I watched her realize the pattern was repeating. I watched her understand that every reaction she had was adding weight to the ledger. She whispered my name again, but this time it wasn't a warning. It was fear. And I knew, with the certainty of a man reading a locked door that had finally cracked open, that the fundraiser was not going to be an evening of polite smiles anymore, because she had already tried to bring him into our public life, and now she was going to have to explain why. The only question left was whether she would collapse quietly or whether she would try to burn the room down on her way out. By morning, she acted like the phone buzz never happened, which was either confidence or denial, and I had learned those two look identical on people who lie for sport. She moved through the kitchen with the same stiff cheerfulness she used at funerals and office parties, pouring coffee like we were a normal couple and not a slow-motion collapse with matching mugs. I watched her hands instead of her face, because hands betray panic faster than words do, and she kept touching her pocket like her phone was a wound she needed to cover. When I asked if she slept well, she said yes too quickly, then added a comment about my paranoia like it was a joke, and the joke landed dead on the tile. I did not bring up Grant's name again, not yet, because I did not need her confession to move forward, and I did not need her permission to protect myself. I had the voicemail, I had the venue email, I had the lock screen photo with the time, and I had a phone bill that made the word overreacting sound like a punchline told by someone with no sense of shame. So I did what I had started doing weeks ago, which was treat my marriage like a case file, not a romance, and treat my feelings like a loud neighbor I could ignore. She left for work with a careful goodbye and an extra pause at the doorway, as if she expected me to stop her, and when I didn't, her eyes flashed with something I couldn't name. It might have been anger or relief or a hunger for a fight she could use as proof. Once the door closed, I opened the shared account portal and requested the detailed usage breakdown again, because I wanted the pattern, not just the total. The total was dramatic, but patterns are what turn drama into consequences. The timestamps clustered in the same windows, late nights, early mornings, and the middle of the day when she claimed she was in back-to-back meetings. I printed the page that showed the heaviest traffic days, and I wrote the dates on a legal pad with a straight edge, because neatness makes chaos look stupid. Then I pulled up our shared calendar and compared those dates to the blocks she used as cover, the committee work, the planning sessions, the networking dinners, all the useful little lies that sound respectable when said aloud. The overlap was not subtle, and that bothered me, because subtle liars are dangerous, and sloppy liars are arrogant. She had not been careful because she did not think she needed to be careful, which meant she believed she owned the story and I was a character inside it. I exported the calendar week view as a PDF again, this time with the color labels visible, and I highlighted the blocks that matched the text spikes. It looked clinical, and that was perfect, because clinical documents do not care about excuses. Then I opened the email from the venue coordinator and replied with a simple question about the RSVP list format, because I wanted a screenshot or a list that showed the added name, and I wanted it in writing, not in memory. The coordinator responded 10 minutes later with a short note and a screenshot of the attendee list excerpt, and there it was again, the name like a stain, Grant Hale, listed as a +1 under my wife's contact line. I printed it, put it in a clear sleeve, and labeled it with the date and time. I did not feel satisfaction, not yet, because satisfaction is for endings, and I was still in the middle where people get stupid. I also did not feel the usual misery that comes with realizing the person you married is capable of this, because misery requires hope, and my hope was already dead. What I felt was something sharper and more useful, like focus, like an internal switch that had finally stopped flickering. If she wanted to build a second life, then fine, but she was not going to build it on my name, my money, and my public face. Around noon, my phone buzzed with a bank notification, the kind that used to mean groceries or gas, the kind that now felt like a trapdoor opening. The charge was from a boutique hotel downtown, not a huge amount, but enough to be deliberate, and it was posted to the shared card we both used for household expenses. I stared at it for a long moment, because I could already hear her explanation in my head, the smooth voice she used when she thought she was smarter than me. She would say it was a meeting, a charity booking, a friend who needed help, anything that sounded noble. So I did not text her. I saved the notification screen, took a screenshot with the merchant name, date, and amount visible, and then I called the hotel front desk, not to accuse, not to investigate like a cop, but to confirm a simple billing fact that any account holder is allowed to confirm. The clerk was polite and careful, and I was careful too. I asked whether the charge was a room stay or a deposit, and I asked for confirmation of the payer name on the folio, not the guest name, not the room, not the private details she would scream about, just the payer. The clerk placed me on a brief hold and came back with the kind of cautious tone people use when they realize they are standing near something messy. He confirmed the payer name matched the card holder, which was my name, and he confirmed the charge date matched the checkout time that morning. That meant it was not a future deposit and not a mistake. It was a completed stay, settled and posted. I thanked him, ended the call, and wrote down the time, because times turn stories into timelines. Then I sat there, listening to my own house, the fridge hum, and the faint tick of the cheap clock we never replaced. And I realized this was not only a betrayal, it was a budget line. She had not only lied, she had spent money on her lie and expected me to smile at dinner afterward. When she came home that evening, she walked in wearing the calm face again, but her shoulders were tight, and her phone was in her hand like she needed it to breathe. She asked what I was making for dinner, which was such a normal question, it almost felt insulting. I told her I had not decided yet, and I watched her eyes scan the kitchen table, like she expected to see the phone bill spread out like a weapon. When she did not see it, she relaxed by a fraction, and that told me she was still guessing how much I knew. People can endure a lot of truth as long as it stays vague, but they panic when truth becomes specific. She started talking about the fundraiser again, about how important it was for her, about how it would look if we did not attend together, about how people would talk. She did not say the word image, but it was in every sentence. Then she pivoted into a small rant about a coworker who didn't respect boundaries, which was almost funny because she said it with real indignation, like boundaries were a sacred thing she defended in public. I nodded and let her talk, because the more she talked, the more she showed me what story she was trying to build. At one point, she mentioned Grant's name casually just once, and she tried to make it sound like he was a nuisance, like he was someone she barely tolerated. She said he had been helpful with some vendor issues for the event, and she said she wished he would stop texting so late because it was annoying. The sentence was designed to pre-frame the truth, and the design was obvious, like watching someone paint over water damage and pretend the stain never existed. I asked her what vendor issues, and she said it was complicated, and she tried to move on quickly, which made it even clearer she was laying groundwork. I told her I had spoken with the venue coordinator about our RSVP, and I watched her freeze, not fully, but enough to be visible if you were looking. She asked why I would do that without telling her, and I said I wanted to make sure our seating was correct, because she had complained about it. She tried to laugh, but the laugh came out dry, and then she asked what the coordinator said, too quickly, too sharp. I kept my voice steady and said the coordinator mentioned a change request for our party. I did not say the name, and I did not accuse. I simply let the sentence hang there, like a hook left in water. Her mouth tightened and she stared at her plate like it had answers. She said there must be a misunderstanding, and she said it with that tired patience she used when she was trying to make me feel childish. She added that I was obsessing again, and she used the same tone, the same phrasing, like she was reading from a script. That was the moment I understood something important. She had rehearsed this, not just emotionally, but verbally, which meant she had been coached or she had coached herself. Either way, it meant she believed she could control my reaction and therefore control the outcome. I stood up, walked to the counter, and put my phone down between us again, not aggressively, just neutrally, like a man setting down a receipt at a restaurant. I opened the screenshot of the RSVP list excerpt and slid the screen toward her, keeping my hand relaxed. I did not tell her what it was. I let her eyes do the work. Her pupils dilated for a split second, and her breathing hitched in a way she could not fully hide. Then she looked up at me with anger that arrived too fast to be genuine, which meant it was defense, not outrage. She started to talk, but the words tripped over each other. She said she was trying to fix something for the fundraiser. She said Grant had access to some vendor contacts. She said the +1 entry was not what it looked like. She said I was twisting everything to make her look bad. She said I was trying to trap her. There it was, the confession in disguise. She knew it was evidence because she called it a trap. Innocent people call it confusion. Guilty people call it a trap. I asked her one question, and I asked it softly, because soft questions force loud lies to expose themselves. I asked why a vendor contact needed to be listed as her +1 at our table. She stared at the screen again and tried to speak, but no explanation fit, because none existed. Then she did what she always did when logic cornered her. She attacked my character. She said I was controlling. She said I was cold. She said I cared more about being right than being married. And she said it with a familiar rhythm that sounded like she had used it before on someone else. That was when my own sarcasm threatened to rise, because the accusation was almost sweet, coming from a woman who had turned our marriage into a night shift texting marathon. But I kept my face calm, because calm is the only thing that makes liars uncomfortable. I told her I did not need her to explain everything, and I told her I only needed her to answer one practical question. I asked whether she had stayed at the boutique hotel downtown last night. Her eyes flicked away, just for a heartbeat, toward her phone on the counter, and that was all I needed. She said no, and she said it too fast, which made the lie loud. I unlocked my phone and pulled up the bank notification screenshot, the merchant name clear, the date clear, the amount clear, and I set it beside the RSVP screenshot like two puzzle pieces that finally clicked. She leaned back slightly, like the air had turned sharp, and for the first time in days, her mask broke enough to show something real underneath. She whispered that I was going too far, which was rich, considering how far she had gone without telling me. Then she stood, grabbed her phone, and walked toward the hallway, saying she needed space, saying she could not do this right now, saying she would not be interrogated in her own home. Her voice carried that tremor of panic that tried to sound like righteous anger, and I watched her retreat with the strange clarity of a man watching a bridge burn behind him. Before she reached the stairs, her phone buzzed again, and this time she did not hide the screen fast enough. I saw the lock screen preview, not the whole message, but enough words to make my stomach tighten. It was from Grant, and it said he had fixed the seating issue, and it added one more line that did not belong in any professional exchange, not even a fake one. It said he could not wait to see her in that dress. She froze mid-step, phone glowing in her hand, and she turned slightly as if she could block my view with her body. But the damage was done, because the sentence had already landed in my mind like a stamp on a document. I did not move, and I did not speak, and I let the silence stretch until it became heavy. She looked back at me with wide eyes, and in those eyes I saw the first true calculation of the night, not how to deny, but how to survive what was coming. Then she did something that told me the fundraiser was not the only stage she had prepared. She said, quietly and carefully, that if I embarrassed her publicly, she would embarrass me worse, and she said it like a warning she expected to work. I stared at her and realized she still thought this was a game of fear, not a game of facts, and that meant she was about to make a mistake big enough to end her own story. Because if she was threatening me now, it meant she had already decided to escalate, and the only question left was what she planned to say first when the room was full of witnesses. My name is Jonah Mercer, and I used to believe that if you kept your voice calm, people would meet you at the same level. That was the lie I lived on for years, the kind that lets a man call a collapsing marriage a rough season and pretend the weather will change on its own. When she stood on the stairs with her phone glowing in her hand, and she threatened to embarrass me publicly if I embarrassed her first, I understood something simple and ugly. She was not afraid of what she did. She was afraid of who would find out, and she thought fear was a lever she could pull on me like a brake. I did not raise my voice. I did not step toward her. I did not give her the comfort of a reaction she could later describe as rage. I just watched her, let the silence fill the space between us, and waited for her to realize silence can be sharper than shouting. She took another step up, then another, as if height would give her control. She had always believed distance created safety, the way she locked her phone, closed her laptop, turned her body away in bed, and called it independence. She said I was cold, but what she meant was that I did not melt on command. She told me we were done talking, and disappeared into the bedroom, the door closing with a soft click that sounded rehearsed. I stayed at the table for a full minute after she left, staring at my phone like it was a witness that could testify without my help. I opened the screenshot of the lock screen preview again, and I looked at the words that had slipped through her grip, the dress line, the casual certainty, the intimacy hiding behind the flimsy mask of event logistics. Then I opened the bank notification screenshot and the RSVP excerpt and placed them side by side on the screen because my brain needed the simple geometry of proof. She could call me paranoid, controlling, dramatic, overreacting, and any other word she used like perfume, but words did not change timestamps. She came back downstairs 10 minutes later wearing a different face, the reasonable one, the one she used with customer service reps and distant relatives. She said she had been stressed, and she said she had not slept well, and she said she did not mean what she said about embarrassing me. Then she added that I had forced her into saying it, which was a neat trick, blaming me for her threat as if threats were involuntary reflexes. She asked if we could talk like adults, and I almost laughed, because adults do not delete messages at 3:47 a.m. and then pretend it is normal. I told her we could talk, and I meant it, but I also meant I would not talk the way she wanted. I would not argue about feelings, I would not debate interpretations, I would not climb into the fog with her and let her rearrange the furniture. I asked her to sit. She sat, but her knee bounced under the table, and her eyes kept drifting to her phone like it was a lifeboat. I asked her for one thing, and I asked it calmly. I wanted her to tell me Grant's number. She blinked. She hesitated. She said she did not have it memorized. She said she barely talked to him. She said I was fixating on one person because I needed a villain. I nodded like I was listening to a presentation. Then I slid my phone across the table and showed her the carrier usage page I had printed earlier. I did not accuse. I did not narrate. I just let her see the number that had swallowed our month, the 7,439 texts, the kind of volume you do not rack up with a vendor contact. Her face went pale in a slow, controlled way, like a dimmer switch turning down. She tried to reclaim ground by asking why I had looked at the phone bill in the first place, as if shared accounts were her private sanctuary. She asked if I had been snooping. She asked if I had been tracking her. She tried to put me on trial because she knew she was losing. I let her questions hang there, and I answered only the one that mattered. I told her the phone bill arrived, and I opened it, because that is what bills are for. If she wanted privacy, she should have bought her lies with her own money and her own account, not with my name on the statement. Her lips pressed together. She said the texts were exaggerated because they were in a group thread for the fundraiser. She said the carrier counted notifications and automated messages. She said Grant used a shared work number. She said a lot of things that sounded plausible in a vacuum, and that was her specialty, building a vacuum around her choices and calling it context. I did not argue. I asked her to show me the group thread on her phone. The request was simple. The refusal was instant. She said her phone was personal. She said I was being invasive. She said she would not hand over her autonomy. She said I was trying to control her. She said, again, that I was overreacting. And that was when something in me went cold, in the way cold weather goes into your bones. Not dramatic, not explosive, just final. I looked at her and realized she was still running the same script, still confident the script would work, still assuming I would chase her into the maze. I told her I did not need her phone. I said it softly, and I watched her frown, because she did not understand what I meant yet. I picked up my own phone, opened the voicemail file, and set the volume to a level she could hear clearly. I did not play it right away. I let her see the screen first, the title, the time marker, the undeniable fact that I had something she could not snatch back. She started to speak, and I raised a hand, not aggressively, just enough to stop her, like a teacher stopping a student who had not done the reading. Then I played it. Her voice came through the speaker, not the polished version she used on me, but the careless one, the one she did not know she had left behind. The words were not obscene, not graphic, but they were intimate, familiar, filled with the easy shorthand of two people who had been speaking in secret for a long time. There was a laugh. There was a promise about the fundraiser. There was a line about how she could handle me, how I was predictable, how I would calm down if she fed me the right story. Then there was the sound of her ending the message too late, the little breath at the end, the proof that she had not meant for anyone else to hear it. When the voicemail ended, the room felt smaller. She stared at me like I had changed species. For a second, she looked genuinely afraid, not of me physically, but of the reality that she had left evidence in the open, and I had picked it up with clean hands. She tried to speak, but nothing came out. Her throat moved. Her fingers curled around the edge of the table. Then she did what she always did when trapped. She attacked the method. She said I had recorded her. She said I had manipulated the audio. She said I had invaded her privacy. She said it was illegal, which was adorable coming from someone who had been stealing hours of our life to give them to a man she called just a contact. I told her it was her voicemail. I told her it was on my phone because she left it on my phone. I told her I had not hacked anything, tracked anything, or bribed anyone. I just answered the phone, the way a husband answers the phone in his own home. Her face tightened as if she wanted to call me a liar, but she could not find a place to put the word. She stood up abruptly, chair scraping the floor, and for a moment I thought she might throw something or slam a door. But she did something worse. She started to cry, not quietly, not genuinely, but loudly, theatrically, with enough volume that it felt aimed at the walls. She said she was under pressure. She said she felt alone. She said I was emotionally absent. She said she had needs. She said she had made a mistake. And then, between the sobs, she slipped and said the one thing she did not mean to say. She said Grant understood her. It was a tiny sentence, but it landed like a stamp. She realized it too late, eyes widening as if she could pull the words back into her mouth. She tried to recover by saying she meant he understood the fundraiser logistics, but the damage was done because logistics do not understand you at midnight. I watched her scramble, and I felt no desire to comfort her, which told me my old self was gone. Comfort is for people who regret. She regretted exposure. She wiped her face, inhaled sharply, and shifted into the next tactic. She said if I tried to ruin her at the fundraiser, she would tell everyone I was abusive. She said she would say I controlled her money. She said she would say I monitored her phone. She said she would say she felt unsafe. She said it in a careful tone, like she was listing options from a menu, and in that moment I understood her threat from earlier was not emotional. It was strategic. She had been preparing a story where she was the victim and I was the monster, because victims get forgiven and monsters get buried. I did not react, because that story feeds on reactions. I nodded slowly and said I appreciated her honesty. The sarcasm in my chest wanted to rise, because hearing a liar threaten to lie harder is like hearing an arsonist complain about smoke, but I kept my voice even. I told her, if she planned to say those things, she should choose her words carefully because false accusations leave their own trails, and trails are my favorite kind of problem. Her eyes narrowed. She asked what that meant. I told her it meant I was done talking in private. That sentence hit her harder than anything else. She asked if I was threatening her. I told her no. I told her I was informing her, because she had spent weeks informing Grant. Then I gathered my printed pages calmly, like a man finishing paperwork, and I put them back into the clear sleeve. I wrote one more line in my evidence ledger, a simple note. Voicemail confirmed, threat made, denial repeated. I signed the bottom and dated it, because I had learned the hard way that memory is a liar's playground. She followed me into the hallway, still trying to pull me back into a fight she could film in her head. She said we needed counseling. She said I was destroying our marriage. She said we could fix this. She said she would cut him off. She said she would do anything. Her words changed every 6 seconds, which was how you could tell she was not aiming at truth. She was aiming at whatever might work. I stopped at the bottom of the stairs and looked at her for a long moment, letting my silence do the job her words refused to do. I told her she had one chance to help herself. I asked for one clean thing. I asked her to send Grant a single message, in front of me, telling him the fundraiser plans were canceled and he should not contact her again. No speeches, no explanation, just a clear boundary. If she did it, I would believe she was at least capable of choosing her marriage for 1 minute. If she refused, I would assume she was choosing the story she had been building. She stared at me, and I watched her calculate. I watched her weigh the comfort of her secret against the danger of losing me. And the worst part was that she hesitated long enough to show me I was not the obvious choice. She finally said she could not do that because it would cause complications for the event. Complications. That was the word she used, like Grant was a supplier and not a man whispering about her dress at night. I nodded once, as if a decision had been confirmed by a stamp, and I turned away. She called my name sharply, then softer. Then she said she was sorry. Then she said I was making a mistake. Then she said I would regret it. Her voice followed me like a bad smell as I walked into my office and closed the door. I sat at my desk and opened my calendar, not to schedule feelings, but to schedule consequences. The fundraiser was in 4 days, and it was exactly the kind of room where reputations live or die without anyone touching a weapon. She thought she could embarrass me publicly. Fine. Let her try. The difference was that her embarrassment would be a performance, and mine would be a record. I opened the venue email again and saved the header. I saved the RSVP screenshot. I saved the bank notification. I saved the voicemail file. I built a 1-page timeline with dates, times, and simple labels, because simple is what lands in people's brains when they are in formal clothes and pretending not to stare. Then I stared at the final line I had written in my ledger, the one about her threat to frame me, and I realized the next move could not be emotional. It had to be careful, it had to be public, and it had to be documented. Behind the door, I heard her pacing. I heard her phone buzz. I heard her whispering, fast, low, urgent. She thought she was out of my reach again. But the reach I needed was not through her phone. It was through the room full of witnesses she was so desperate to impress. And if she was already calling Grant tonight, then that meant she was not planning to survive the fundraiser quietly. She was planning to win it, which meant I had to be ready to end it. Because 4 days was enough time for a liar to build a story, and it was enough time for me to bring the receipts to the table before she could flip the script. The morning after the voicemail, I moved through the house like a man walking through a museum exhibit built from his own mistakes, because everything looked familiar, but none of it felt like it belonged to me anymore. She tried the usual reset routine, which meant coffee, soft tone, and little domestic gestures meant to suggest continuity. But I had already stopped treating continuity as proof of anything. I watched her hands, not her face, because faces can perform, but hands reveal impatience, and her fingers kept tapping the edge of her phone like a nervous metronome. When she asked if we could be civil today, I told her we could be civil for the same reason courts are civil, because civility keeps the record clean. She frowned, and for a second she looked like she might snap. But then she remembered snapping on record would ruin her. I left the house with my evidence sleeve tucked into my work bag, and I did not hide it, because hiding is a liar's hobby, and I was not playing that game anymore. The fundraiser was tomorrow night, and the pressure had already started bleeding into the neighborhood like smoke through vents, because people notice when a couple stops smiling at the same time. At the corner cafe, the barista who always joked with us asked if my wife was coming to the volunteer meeting later, and I said she had a full schedule, which was true, just not in the way anyone would assume. I stayed calm and polite, but I listened to the way he said her name, as if it had already become a topic. When I sat at my car, I opened my phone and checked the simple file folder I had made, because I needed to see order when the rest of my life had become improvisation. The voicemail was there, clean and untouched, and the screenshots were there, stamped by the dates the device saved them, and the carrier usage page was there with its brutal number that did not care about explanations. I did not feel rage when I looked at it anymore, which was the strangest part, because rage would have meant I still wanted her back, and what I felt instead was a quiet, almost clinical certainty that the truth had weight, and weight always wins if you stop trying to lift it with your bare hands. At work, I kept my day normal on the surface, because normal is camouflage, and I needed people to keep underestimating my shift. Around noon, I got a notification from the bank app on my phone, the same shared account she used for committee expenses. And the merchant name was a boutique hotel cafe across town, not our usual spots, and the amount was small, the kind of amount you use to make a lie feel harmless. I stared at it for several seconds, then I saved the screenshot, because the trick with small lies is that they stack, and stacks become towers, and towers eventually cast shadows that everybody can see. I did not call her, and I did not text her, because private confrontation was exactly what she wanted, a sealed room where she could trade tears for time and turn my questions into my faults. Instead, I opened the fundraiser itinerary email in the shared inbox, found the volunteer check-in time, and saved the header again, because if she was spending money in places she never mentioned, then she was also carving holes in the schedule she claimed to respect. That afternoon, I did something I had avoided for years because it felt petty, and pettiness had once embarrassed me. I printed the calendar week view and circled the time blocks she had marked as committee work. Then I stapled the page to the bank notification printout, because paper is honest in a way voices are not. When I got home, she was already there, dressed casually but too carefully, like she was preparing to be seen. She smiled when I walked in, and the smile lasted exactly 1 second longer than it should have, which told me she was rehearsing the timing. She asked how my day went, and I told her it went fine. Then I asked where she had been at lunchtime. She did not even pause, which was also an answer, because lies that arrive instantly are almost always pre-written. She said she grabbed a quick sandwich near the community center while finalizing a seating list, and she said it with a tone that dared me to doubt her. I nodded as if I accepted it, and I asked which community center. She named the right one. I nodded again and asked who she met with. She said nobody, because it was administrative work. I nodded again, then I asked why the bank notification showed the boutique hotel cafe across town. She blinked, and that was the first real moment I had seen from her in days, the microsecond where her brain had to sprint to keep up. She told me the cafe used a different merchant name. She told me vendors sometimes ran charges through partner locations. She told me it might be a pending authorization that would disappear, and she told me I was monitoring her again. I let her finish. Then I said I had not monitored anything. I had received an alert on my phone on an account with my name, and I had screenshotted it like any responsible adult would. She tried to pivot to anger, but anger needed oxygen, and I gave her none, because I just stood there and waited, which forced her to either admit or escalate. She escalated, but she escalated wrong, because she grabbed her phone and waved it like a shield, telling me she could prove everything if I would just stop attacking her. I told her to prove it, and I asked her to show me her calendar for that lunch hour. She refused, and her refusal landed louder than any confession could have. She said I was not entitled to her calendar, which was a stupid argument inside a marriage, and even stupider inside a shared schedule that governed an event she had tied her reputation to. I did not raise my voice. I simply told her that tomorrow, at the fundraiser, I would not sabotage her, I would not create a scene, and I would not embarrass her with a speech, but I would also not protect her from the consequences of what she had built. Her face changed at that, because she was not afraid of me shouting. She was afraid of me refusing to play the private game. She asked what I meant by consequences, and I told her that I meant documentation, witnesses, and timing, the 3 things liars can't control once they leave the house. She stepped closer, voice dropping, and she said we could handle this privately, like adults, and I almost laughed because she had spent months handling things privately like a teenager hiding cigarettes. I told her she had already chosen the public stage, and now she had to perform in the light she created. She tried to touch my arm and I stepped back, not dramatically, just enough to show there was a boundary now, and boundaries are where panic begins. The rest of the evening was a cold war of small movements. She cooked dinner and placed my plate like an offering. Then she complained about my distance, as if distance was cruelty. She asked if I wanted her to call her mother. Then she accused me of trying to isolate her when I said no. She tried to talk about the fundraiser details, then she acted offended when I listened too closely. After dinner, she retreated to the bedroom and made a show of being exhausted, but her phone kept lighting up on the nightstand and she kept flipping it face down like the gesture itself was a prayer. I slept in my office that night, not because I needed comfort, but because I needed quiet, and because I needed my own space to stay mine. Around 1:20 a.m., I heard her footsteps in the hallway, soft and careful, and I did not move, because moving would tell her I was awake, and she still believed in controlling rooms. A minute later, my phone buzzed, and when I looked at it, I saw a new voicemail notification, short, and sent from her number. I listened with the volume down, and I heard her voice, quiet, close to the mic, speaking as if she wanted to sound fragile. She did not apologize. She did not confess. She offered a deal. She said we could reset everything after the fundraiser, and she said she would do whatever it took. But then she added that she needed tomorrow night to go smoothly, because people were watching. People were watching. That phrase told me everything about the hierarchy in her head, because in her mind, the watchers mattered more than the marriage. I saved the voicemail. Then I wrote the line in the evidence ledger, because she kept handing me rope and assuming I would hang myself instead of her. In the morning, she acted like nothing happened, which was her favorite trick, because pretending nothing happened forces the other person to either accept the lie or become the villain who keeps bringing things up. I refused both roles, and I played a third one instead. I told her I would be at the fundraiser early. She asked why, too quickly, and I told her I wanted to help, because helping is a harmless word that makes guilty people nervous. She said she had everything under control, and I said I was sure she did. Then I asked for the updated guest list. She said it was on her laptop. I said great. Then I asked her to email it to me. She said she would later. I said okay. Then I opened my own laptop and printed the older RSVP screenshot I already had, because if she was stalling, she was hiding names. Around midday, a mutual friend from the volunteer committee texted me, asking if my wife was okay, because she had been short with everyone and snapped at the coordinator over seating, and I replied that she was stressed but capable. Because I was not here to assassinate her, I was here to let her own actions do the work. Still, the message mattered, because it meant her mask was slipping in public, which meant my timing had to be precise. That evening, I went to my car and checked the dashcam files from the last week, not to stalk her, but because I knew the camera would have captured locations when I drove her places, and sometimes the truth lives in the boring corners you forget you recorded. I found one clip from a committee supply run, where she asked me to drop her near downtown, then told me to circle the block because she needed to grab one thing. The timestamp matched a block on the calendar she had labeled volunteer planning, and the location marker pinned us right outside the boutique hotel cafe. I froze the frame at the moment she stepped out, and I saw a figure in the distance waiting near the entrance, a man in a dark coat, face turned away, holding a phone. The image was grainy and ordinary, which was exactly why it was powerful, because ordinary is where affairs hide. I saved the still frame. Then I sat there in the driver's seat with the engine off, staring at the evidence sleeve in my bag like it was the only stable object left in my life. The fundraiser was hours away, and the room would be full of donors, volunteers, and board members who thought they were there to celebrate generosity. My wife believed she could win that room with charm and proximity, and Grant believed he could stand beside her like he belonged. The truth was that I did not need to ruin anyone. I just needed to stop shielding the lie from the light. When I walked back into the house, she was already dressed in the outfit she had referenced in that lock screen preview, and she did not even realize that detail had become a nail in the coffin. She smiled at me, asked if I was ready, and her voice sounded too bright, like she was trying to drown out the fear with volume. I told her I was ready. Then I asked one last simple question, the kind that forces a liar to choose between two bad options. I asked whether Grant would be there tonight. She paused, just long enough. Then she said no. Her phone buzzed the moment she finished the word, and she flinched like a guilty reflex, and I watched her eyes flick down to the screen before she could stop herself. I did not need to see the message. The flinch was the message. I picked up my coat, took my bag with the evidence sleeve inside, and followed her to the door. As we stepped into the night air, she slipped her phone into her clutch with a tight, careful motion, and I realized she was not just trying to survive the fundraiser anymore. She was trying to control it, and control was exactly what I planned to take from her the moment we walked into that ballroom. The ballroom smelled like polished wood, expensive perfume, and the faint metallic bite of anxiety that people mistake for excitement. And the moment we walked in, I saw the board members clustered near the stage like they owned the oxygen. My wife's posture changed as if she had put on armor, shoulders back, chin lifted, smile ready, because this room was her habitat, and she believed habitats belonged to the strongest performer. I stayed half a step behind her, not because I was afraid to be seen, but because I wanted to watch how she moved when she thought I was still a prop. The volunteer coordinator waved at us from the check-in table, clipboard in hand, eyes bright with forced cheer, and my wife glided toward her with a practiced warmth that never reached her eyes. I nodded, offered to help, and the coordinator looked relieved, because a husband helping looks like stability, and stability is what these events sell. My wife's smile tightened when I asked where the seating chart was, because she expected me to stand quietly and clap, not to touch the machinery. I offered to carry boxes, straighten programs, and run small errands, and nobody questioned it, because a man doing practical work disappears into the background, which is exactly where I needed to be. The sound system tested a microphone with 3 dull thumps, and the MC rehearsed names under his breath, and every time a donor walked in, the greeters leaned forward like sunflowers, eager for any hint of approval. My wife moved between groups, lightly touching elbows, laughing at the right volume, and collecting attention the way some people collect spare change, because it adds up fast when you never stop. I watched her phone once, twice, a dozen times, because the phone never left her hand for long, and each time it lit up, she angled the screen away from me as if my eyes were a security camera. I made myself useful, but I also counted timing, because timing is where lies bleed. When she said she needed a minute in the ladies' room, I did not follow, and I did not demand anything, because I was done giving her a private stage. Instead, I walked to the check-in table and asked for the latest RSVP list, casual, polite, like I cared about logistics and not betrayal, and the coordinator handed me a printed sheet without hesitation, because she thought she was helping a supportive spouse. I scanned names slowly, forcing my breath to stay even, and there it was, a line I did not recognize on the older screenshot I had printed, a late add-on listed under a sponsor category, with a +1 note that made my stomach go quiet. The name was not a stranger's, not some random donor, not a harmless guest, but a man my wife and I both knew, a man who had been in our home, who had joked with me, and who had shook my hand like respect was a shared language. Grant Holloway was written in black ink, like the truth did not care how many nights she deleted messages at 3:47 a.m. I did not react outwardly, because outward reactions are what liars feed on, but inside I felt the last soft piece of doubt dissolve, and what remained was a clean, hard line that would not bend. I folded the sheet carefully, as if it was just paper, and slipped it into my bag beside the evidence sleeve, because this was not emotion anymore. It was structure. The event began to fill, and the room got louder in that specific way rich rooms get loud, where people laugh more than they mean to and talk over each other to prove they belong. A photographer drifted between clusters, calling for quick smiles, capturing proof that generosity existed, and my wife stayed near the center of every frame because she understood that visibility is currency. I stood near the edge, close enough to observe, far enough to be ignored, and I watched the doors. When Grant arrived, he did not walk in timidly like a man entering someone else's space, but confidently, like he expected the room to make space for him. He wore a dark suit that fit too well for a volunteer, and his smile was the kind men practice in mirrors when they want to look harmless and competent. My wife saw him before anyone announced him, because her entire body shifted toward him as if pulled by a magnet, and then she corrected herself quickly, turning the motion into a casual scan of the room. Grant moved toward her, paused at the last moment, and angled toward a donor group instead, because he understood optics too. I watched their eyes meet across the room, and the look was small, fast, and loaded, like a private joke passing between two people who thought nobody else spoke the language. My wife's cheeks lifted in a smile that was not meant for the donors in front of her, and then she quickly redirected, laughing at something a board member said too loudly, too abruptly, because she needed to cover the slip. The volunteer coordinator tapped the microphone for the real start, and the room calmed into a polite hush. Dinner service began, and people found their seats, and my wife took her place near the head table, because of course she did, because being seen is her first religion. I took my seat at a side table with other volunteers, where the lighting was dimmer and the conversations were safer, and I felt her glance search for me like she needed to confirm I was still in my assigned role. I met her eyes once, held them, then looked away first, because control is also a language, and I wanted her to feel, even briefly, what it was like to be watched without being able to steer the gaze. Between salad and the main course, I excused myself, walked toward the hallway outside the ballroom, and stopped at the small corkboard where volunteer notices were pinned. It was a simple space, neutral, ignored, which made it perfect, because the best reveals happen in places people do not expect drama. I took out the one-page timeline I had prepared at home, the one built from dates, times, and clean labels, and I pinned it next to the event schedule with a neat pushpin like it belonged there. I kept it factual, stripped of opinion, because opinion invites debate, and documents shut debates down. The timeline did not accuse anyone directly. It simply showed the pattern, the late-night deletions, the phone bill count, the bank notification, the boutique hotel cafe, and the dashcam still-frame timestamp, all aligned in a way that made lies look childish. I stepped back and looked at it like a stranger would, and I felt a steady calm settle in, because I had done nothing illegal, nothing theatrical, nothing violent, and yet the truth was now in public air. I returned to the ballroom as if I had gone to the restroom, and I let the event continue. 10 minutes later, the first ripple moved through the room, subtle and fast, because gossip travels like electricity when people are bored enough to enjoy it. A volunteer I recognized stood near the hallway entrance, staring at the corkboard, hand over mouth, then whispering to the person beside her. Another person wandered over, curious, then froze, then walked back inside with a stiff face. The sound of the room changed, not louder, but sharper, as if everyone's laughter had gained edges. My wife did not notice at first, because she was busy playing gracious host, but the moment someone approached her with that cautious, sympathetic expression, she stiffened and her eyes darted toward the hallway like an animal hearing a trap close. Grant noticed too, because he suddenly shifted from charming to alert, his shoulders tightening, his smile thinning, his gaze moving like he was searching for the source of a smell. When my wife stood up abruptly and walked toward the hallway, I did not rush after her, because chasing is what she wanted, a private corner where she could cry and bargain and claim misunderstanding. I followed at a normal pace, slow enough to look unbothered, close enough to hear what mattered. She reached the corkboard, saw the timeline, and for a second her face emptied out, as if every mask had slipped at once. She spun toward me, eyes hot, jaw tight, and she whispered my name like it was a threat. I did not whisper back. I simply looked at the paper, then at her, then at Grant, who had stepped into the hallway with a careful, controlling calm that did not match the panic in his eyes. My wife demanded to know what I was doing, and I told her I was posting the truth where anyone could read it, because she had spent months hiding the truth where only she could control it. She said this was humiliating, and I said humiliation was what happens when a lie meets daylight. Grant tried to step in, tried to frame it as a misunderstanding, tried to imply I was unstable, and I almost smiled, because that was exactly the narrative my wife would have used if I had confronted her in private. I told Grant he was welcome to deny any line on the timeline, and I pointed at the phone bill count, because numbers do not care about charm. He did not deny it. My wife did, loudly, insisting the texts were harmless, insisting they were project-related, insisting she needed support, insisting I was twisting everything. I asked one simple question, calm enough to sound bored, and I asked why she had deleted messages at 3:47 a.m. if nothing needed hiding. She opened her mouth, and nothing useful came out, because that question does not have a flattering answer. People began to gather at the hallway entrance, drawn by the tension, and the volunteer coordinator appeared with a strained face, trying to keep control, because she understood that donors hate mess unless the mess is someone else's. My wife turned toward the coordinator, voice rising, demanding the timeline be removed, saying it was inappropriate, and the coordinator hesitated, caught between politeness and the awkward fact that nothing on the paper was obscene, threatening, or violent. Grant tried to pull my wife away, hand lightly at her elbow, and she shrugged him off too sharply, because panic makes people forget their roles. The coordinator asked what was going on, and I told her, in clear, plain words, that my wife had been hiding a relationship with Grant, and that I had documentation to support it, and that I had no intention of disrupting the gala itself, only of correcting the story that was already spreading. My wife's face flushed, and she hissed that I was ruining everything, and I said she ruined it the night she decided truth was optional. The coordinator asked if I could take it down for the night, and I said I could take the paper down after it had been read, because removing it immediately would only make people assume it was true anyway, and I was tired of managing assumptions. The coordinator looked torn, then looked past us into the ballroom, where donors were watching with polite curiosity, and she made a decision the way people do when their reputation is on the line. She asked for a brief pause, said she would address a small volunteer issue, and she guided us back toward the ballroom with the tight smile of someone escorting a fire into a room full of dry wood. As we stepped back inside, the MC faltered mid-sentence because he saw the faces, and the energy shifted toward attention, toward spectacle, toward the thing everyone pretends they do not want while secretly craving it. My wife tried to grab my arm, tried to pull me toward the side, tried to drag the conflict back into shadows, but I stepped away again, creating that small, clean distance that felt like a wall. Grant stood beside her, too close to be innocent, too visible to be ignored, and the room noticed, because rooms like this notice everything. The coordinator walked to the microphone, cleared her throat, and announced a short recess for a volunteer clarification, and then she looked at me, eyes pleading as if asking me to keep it controlled. I nodded once, because I had no desire to scream or fight, and then I reached into my bag and felt the edge of the evidence sleeve, smooth plastic, sharp corners, and I understood that the next minute would decide whether my wife could keep lying through her teeth, or whether the room would finally hear the part of the story she never expected to become public. When the coordinator asked, softly but clearly, If there was documented proof beyond a hallway timeline, my wife started to speak, and I let her begin. Because the best way to collapse a liar is to let them build the structure first, and then remove one load-bearing piece. She said I was exaggerating. She said I was paranoid. She said I had been distant for months. She said Grant was only helping her with the charity, and she said the texts were about planning. Then she turned and looked at Grant for confirmation, like a reflex. Grant nodded, too quickly, and that nod was the first crack. I stepped forward, placed my phone on the table nearest the microphone stand, and I said I would not argue opinions tonight. I would only play a recording she had already made, and as I tapped the voicemail icon and watched my wife's face drain of color, I realized she was finally understanding the one thing she had never believed about me, which was that I was not here to beg her to stop. I was here to make sure she could not deny it. My name is Adrian, and I have never heard a room go quiet the way that ballroom went quiet when my phone speaker turned her private confidence into public sound. The voicemail was not romantic, not poetic, not even clever, because most betrayals are lazy once the liar believes the audience is trapped, and all she left behind was a clear set of details that could not be spun into charity planning. I watched faces change in real time, not into rage or melodrama, but into that cold, evaluative expression people wear when they realize they have been recruited into someone else's cover story. My wife tried to reach for the phone, but the volunteer coordinator stepped between us like a gate closing, and the simple fact of that small barrier did more damage than any shout ever could. Grant's posture shifted from confident to calculating, and he scanned the room as if looking for an exit that would not cost him status. But there was no exit in a room full of donors who suddenly felt personally offended by deception. I did not raise my voice or add speeches because the evidence did the only work that mattered, and my silence forced everyone else to fill it with their own conclusions. The coordinator asked for the printed timeline, asked for the phone bill image, and asked for the saved voicemail screen that showed the date and time, and I handed over what I had brought in a clear sleeve, labeled plain and boring, because boring proof is the hardest thing to argue against. A board secretary, who had been taking notes for the event program, started typing again with the brisk focus of someone who knows what official minutes are for, and that click-click sound landed like a verdict. My wife tried to pivot into tears, then tried anger, then tried disbelief, but each shift only made her look more scripted, because truth does not change costumes when it gets cornered. Grant attempted a quiet apology toward the coordinator and a promise to explain later, yet the room had already decided that later was a privilege he no longer deserved. The coordinator announced calmly that Grant's name would be removed from vendor access immediately, that a formal compliance review would open before morning, and that my wife would be asked to step down from the committee pending investigation because the charity could not afford her reputation problems. I did not celebrate, because this was not a victory parade, it was a ledger closing, and the final entry was simply the fact that she could not touch the story anymore. I picked up my phone, slid it back into my